Hi, I'm Anne Bowditch. As part of my anxiety relief series, we're covering the anxiety brain to help you gain a better understanding of why you may have that anxiety. Just a reminder to hit the subscribe button and ding the bell so that you can receive updates. So anxiety is taking away the now and living in fear of a future which in all reality is very unlikely to happen. And that anxiety brain is actually trying to help you. It's trying to do its best for you. It's wanting to keep you safe and wanting usually to find solutions. But before that, it finds the problems and then realizes it doesn't know the solution, but continues to focus on the problem. And I'm sure you're aware of many of the symptoms that come with anxiety. You've probably experienced a lot of these. So we've got the shallow breathing. At times this can lead to hyperventilation. Heart racing, very common feeling for anxiety sufferers. Those clammy hands. Perspiration. Clouded thinking. You just can't think straight. Your mind is all over the place. That digestion can shut down, and long term can lead to issues such as irritable bowel syndrome. There's more blood and oxygen going to the working muscles because it's actually preparing you to run or to fight. Sometimes it can result in shaking because that energy is sort of stuck in you. It can also be limited blood flow to the hands and to the feet, so it leads to a feeling of cold or tingling. Pupils dilate and nausea. And I tend to like to simplify things. As far as I'm concerned, there's two sort of main anxieties. We've got the generalized anxiety disorder, which is a recognized disorder, and then more specific anxiety, which means that the anxiety tends to come in certain situations. So that generalized anxiety disorder tends to be chronic worry and tension. So the mind is constantly occupied by fear, by worry, by creating problems. And that then obviously leads to a physical tension. It of course leads to high levels of stress, again, both physically and mentally. The mind is constantly running those worst case scenarios over and over. Of course, it can rule and ruin your life because it's just so all-consuming. And generalized anxiety disorder is not necessarily triggered by events. There can be other reasons for it. And then we've got the more specific types of anxiety. There may be certain events in your life which have caused you to experience anxiety. So certain events trigger it. You may not have always suffered with anxiety. So for instance, if you were in a very controlling relationship, maybe even violent or abusive in one way or another, then that can lead to anxiety. Also, things like work problems can lead to anxiety. Very often people problems is a real trigger for causing that anxiety. And it's only sometimes triggered in key situations, so situations which may unconsciously remind you of that first trigger event or a number of trigger events. So if you were in some bad relationship, you may even be triggered at the thought of going into another relationship. And specific anxiety could be any host of things, but it's very often common with social anxiety and public speaking. And there's a whole host of other possibles for anxiety. And there's a very fine line really between what's anxiety and what's a fear or a phobia. because the reactions are pretty similar. But when that anxiety is not triggered, you can often just go about your day-to-day life with no problem. So public speaking is a very obvious one for this, because it's not often that we're called upon to do any public speaking. But if you've got an event coming up and you are anxious about it, then you're going to create some of that anxiety and those anxiety symptoms. Whereas most of the time, you don't need to public speak, therefore you just get on with life. So anxiety really is just part of our natural makeup, and it's linked to a part of the brain called the limbic system. So this is, I suppose, the more sciencey bit behind it. It is that fight or flight response, preparing us to fight or to flee a situation. And it dates back to our ancestry, when we had to perhaps fight off some scary animal, or we were looking to find some food, or we had to protect our family and our home. So in those times, we probably would have fought or run. But in our very different lives now, we're much more domesticated. Those are not generally options for us to fight or to run. And that leads us in a very difficult situation, because our body's ready to do that, but actually we're not in a position to be able to do the fighting or the running. The key thing to remember about anxiety is it is trying to keep you safe, but it is also distressing you, because although that limbic system is doing its job, you could say it contains unhelpful information. Information that's making you anxious in situations where you don't want to be anxious. So this is what this slice of the brain looks like, and the key players in the limbic system related to anxiety. So we've got the hypothalamus, we've got the thalamus, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. And we're just going to look at these in a bit more detail. So let's look at the thalamus. This is linked to sensory information, and it relays this sensory information to another part of the brain, which is called the cerebral cortex. So in terms of sensory information within the thalamus, we're talking about things that you see, hear, taste, and touch. This actually does not include smell. And it links these senses to emotions and then to memories. So the brain is connecting everything up. What did I see in that event? What did I hear? Probably less often are things that we might taste, but they can be linked. And also, what did I feel? Either physically feel by touching something, or feel inside of you. Because generally we remember much more about the way we felt in situations than we might do about some of our other senses. You could say that this is a filing system. And what is your strongest memory, maybe from 10 or more years ago? So I was thinking about a few of my memories and how I link with some of those senses. And I was just talking to a friend about failing the 11 plus, and I can remember getting the letter, but the main thing I really remember was having realised I'd failed, and not long after that I went to a corner shop down the road, and we knew the shop owner quite well. And the shop owner had asked me how I'd got on. She knew the results were out, and I told her I'd failed. And I will always remember her going to the till and getting 50 pence out and handing it to me. But what I remember about that is how I felt. I know that she was trying to do something good, but in doing so, it actually made me feel worse, because I think I knew that there was an element of sympathy, and I probably didn't want sympathy. So I recall that feeling that I had at the time. And if I think about maybe a more positive element, is music. I've always loved music. As a youngster, I used to absolutely love pop music, and now I probably like more genres of music. But one music that comes to mind is the pop group Queen, or rock group Queen. And my husband and I, when we used to drive to races, cycle races, we would put on their song Bohemian Rhapsody, and we'd sort of be head bobbing along and singing out loud on the way to the race. It was always a good feel, a good vibe. And then we started to associate hearing Queen music with something positive, and particularly if we heard it around a race day, if it was on, say, the radio. And I recall having a really important race at home. This was back in 2003. It was part of a big event. And we were racing around the seafront. It was a town criterium. It was the last race of the whole event. There were loads of people there. And being a local, there was lots of support for me. And I remember being very tired. It had been a very exhausting week. This was my 5th race in probably about 6 days. And not only that, I think the emotional drain of the racing and being at home had taken its toll. So I was really, really tired. And I'd gone to warm up on the pier. So I was on my sort of static bike on the pier warming up. And over the radio came Queen. And once again I thought, this is going to be good. It's a good vibe. I always got that good vibe with Queen. And I did win the race. And it's interesting, isn't it, that we can make these positive associations as well. So for me, it was the hearing, the sound of the Queen music, but it also gave me a feeling. And it also, if you like, planted a suggestion for me that this is going to be good. I'd sort of made this very strong association. The other thing that's really important to understand about the limbic system is that it responds far quicker and automatically than your sort of conscious mind, than you can analyze a situation. So even though you might be able to look at a situation later on and know that everything was okay, in that moment your limbic system has fired off. It's gone through that filing system, and it's made a decision as to whether this event is safe or unsafe, bad or good, and it's made a decision on that, and it's caused you to react to it, even before you've had proper opportunity to analyse that. And then we've got the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus links to the body's internal balance. We talk about homeostasis, which is that balance within the body. And, the body is an amazing system, isn't it? And it's doing so many different things to keep us healthy. But there are times when things go a bit skewy because we've put too much pressure on the body. But this is sending the messages through the body to keep the body nice and balanced. And the hypothalamus regulates the nervous system. As part of that, we have the stress side, which is the sympathetic nervous system. So when we're stressed, it's going to be sending out those hormones. Or the other side, the nice calm part, known as the parasympathetic nervous system, or rest and digest. So when we can calm down, the body can digest and we can breathe nice and calmly. So we've got these two ends of the scale. And the hypothalamus is also the link of information from the nervous system and the endocrine system, which releases hormones. So information comes in, particularly in terms of anxiety, we're talking about the stress. And that information then goes through the nervous system, and it's sending a message to the adrenal glands, which are on top of the kidneys, to release stress hormones. It's saying we need these stress hormones. We've got a situation here. We need to deal with it. Let's get those stress hormones going so that we can deal with it. So we can prepare you to fight or run, fight or flight. It's an incredible system. And again, it's trying to do its best. And obviously that constant stress can lead to many other issues, things like insomnia. I've mentioned IBS, maybe memory issues as well. There can be a whole host of other knock-on effects of that long-term stress if those adrenal glands constantly under pressure. If you're tired all the time, it could well be because those adrenal glands are constantly under pressure. So let's look at the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is part of the formation of new memories, and this also does include perceived threatening events. And it processes these new memories in a very unconscious manner. And it connects the senses and emotions to those memories. So it's linking in, going, this was good, this is what I recall about that memory, that was what I heard, that was what I felt, that was what I saw, that's good, that's bad. So it's, again, think of it as a filing system. One side you've got safe, the other side you've got unsafe. And then it's linking those memories to anything that is a similar situation. So let's have an example. If, for example, you were in a situation where there were a number of people around and something happened which caused you to be in fear. So, for instance, you might not like drunk people, and say somebody came in and they were very, very drunk and you felt, oh, I don't like this is quite threatening. But also within that vicinity, there were lots of people. Let's assume you were in a pub and there were lots of people. What your mind may then do is make an association that lots of people puts you in a fearful position. And then next time you're in a situation where there's lots of people, regardless of whether there's anybody drunk there, when there's lots of people, your mind decides that is dangerous for you because it's linked. It's done an extra link. It's gone drunk person, lots of crowds, that's fearful. So your mind then assesses very, very quickly any new situations. And it will decide, this is fine, this is okay, it's pleasant, it's fine. Or it will say, this is stressful or perhaps threatening. So your mind is working out, looking back through that filing system and looking for similar situations and making a decision as to whether those situations are good or bad for you. And if those situations are considered bad for you, you're going to be in that fight or flight mode. And let's look at the amygdala now. So the amygdala is involved in the processing of emotions. And it's linked to both the fear response and also to pleasure. So far we've got the amygdala and it's linked to emotions. You could say that it's a communication hub between the parts of the brain that process the incoming information linked to those senses, things we see, hear, taste and feel, and the parts of the brain that then interprets those. And then it makes associations with events. And based on those associations with events, you'll either be in the fight or the flight response if it sees those events as in some way unsafe for you. So that fight response, obviously, it's a difficult one to be able to use because we can't just go round fighting people. But if you've ever experienced any type of road rage or intense frustration where really you just really want to punch someone or something, that's the fight part. And then the flight, we want to run away. And of course, in terms of anxiety, the amygdala is linked to that fear response. So it's very key. I always like to make things as simple as possible. And this is how I tend to see what happens in a bit of a nutshell here. So the information comes into the brain. It is processed by the brain incredibly quickly. The information is then interpreted as safe or unsafe in terms of anxiety. In terms of how the mind sees that information, so depending on whether the interpretation is considered safe or unsafe, that fight or flight response may be triggered. So that in a way there's a type of logic to the process, because it's going back, referring to what the information you already have, and then deciding this is good, this is bad. Let's get out of here. Let's throw off those stress hormones and let's run or fight. So you could say that the limbic system is an information storage system and processing center. And that directs our reactions to events. That's why we don't all react to events in the same way, because the information contained in our minds is different. Now, a big part of addressing this limbic system and to bring it more into balance is to address the problem memories. That is a huge step. I work with a lot of anxiety sufferers, and very often there may be one or two big trigger memories. And when we work on those, and I use therapies such as hypnotherapy, emotional freedom technique, matrix re-imprinting. So when we address the memories, that can be a big part of bringing the mind into calm, because now it stores a whole host of positive information. And this is the beauty of the mind, is we can change what the mind sees as good or bad. So overcoming anxiety is really a multifaceted approach. I found that to be really successful. Yes, dealing with memories can have a huge impact, and that definitely needs to happen. But there are other things you can do. Breathing is so important. As I say to people, you breathe anyway, so it takes up no more of your time. But to use your lungs properly, to breathe deeply and slowly, can have a really positive effect. Do not underestimate it because it seems too simple. In fact, so often anxiety sufferers do not do any deep breathing and struggle at first to connect with their diaphragm and their lower lungs, and it takes a bit of time. Just bringing in some calm energy into your life. And that can be things like listening to calming music, meditation, yoga, being creative, a nice walk. There's so many things you can do. Having a balanced exercise routine. I'm aware sometimes that people use intense exercise to release those stress hormones, and yes, you initially feel better, but you are putting a very big drain on those adrenals by doing intense exercise and having anxiety. So balance is really important. I'm not saying to stop intense exercise, but don't do it every single day. Creating positive triggers, so linking in with positive emotions, using those previous experiences that you've had, the positive ones that I spoke about earlier. So where I use the Queen music as a positive, there will be lots of other positive memories and triggers that you can have and use. I will probably talk about this in more depth another time. The mind is so powerful. If there's something you want to achieve, show the mind what you want to achieve. And again, we'll probably look at visualization later on another time. But visualization is an amazing tool. So if, for instance, getting to the shops for you is a challenge, or maybe going into a crowded place, visualize yourself doing those things and doing them calmly, even having a good time, because you're showing your mind, creating new memories, if you like, that this is all good for you. It takes practice. You don't just do these things once and it's all fine. It takes practice. You've got to keep at these things. Gaining new perspectives. I talk about a lot of perspectives in my book because I think sometimes we believe certain things and they're not the truth. We might believe that we should be a certain way, that we need to please people. We're always feeling judged. So I address a lot of these things because these are the things that I end up talking to anxiety sufferers about because they're part of the problem. So anxiety can be such a multifaceted issue. Establishing a positive mindset. Now, I talk about negativity and then how to flip that into something more positive in one of my other videos. So have a look at that and start to work on your mindset. And again, very similar, there's an inner voice video, which is my second video in the series, I believe, and we talk about the inner voice. And there are a few very, very simple things that you can do to start to make that inner voice more positive. And clearing those subconscious blocks, which partly is done through those memories, and creating more and more positivity. It's amazing what you can achieve when you get to work on these issues. If you'd like to know more, along with talking about anxiety in my book and explaining a bit more about the limbic system and the subconscious and why you may have anxiety, I also include lots of perspectives on life and dealing with life, as well as being packed full of exercises. You can go away, you can do those exercises, and it's an amazing toolbox for you. And as I always say to people, please do the exercises. Don't just read through the book, which lots of people do enjoy the book and get very enthused and just want to move on to the next thing and then don't do the exercises. So please do make sure that you do, because they will make a difference. Thank you for watching. I love making these videos. I'm very committed to helping people, whether it's anxiety or other issues. And just a reminder to sign up, view my other videos in the series, and if you haven't, to hit the subscribe button.